Hello, everyone. Today is Tuesday, March 12th, 2024. This is a meeting of the SIG Network Policy API subgroups of SIG Network. This is a CNCF sponsored meeting, so please follow the rules, which basically boils down to let's be nice to each other and use appropriate language. Yeah, so let's get started today. The agenda is pretty empty, as I was saying before. I added a note just highlighting that we have QCon coming up next week. We have a talk in the maintainers track that Nadia and Hunter are spearheading. So if they reach out to any of you asking for help on slides, it's just to make sure that we highlight, everyone involved here. We want to make sure everyone, it's everyone's talk. Maintainers track. So we're excited about that. And yeah, I see Nadia adding something as I talk. So I think we can kind of toss it over and talk about sort of a tenancy update where we are with the tenancy NPEP, which has been going on for quite some time now.
Yeah, exactly. Just wanted to give you an update. We had a couple more conversations. The last one with Dan, who is wisely on PTO now. So he left a nice comment saying that we can merge anything while he's not here to object. I don't think that's what we want to do. But basically what we ended up with our last discussion is that he didn't realize all the use cases are not covered by the API he was thinking about this whole time, which means we had a long discussion and we probably will circle back, try to clarify our user stories a bit more, and then maybe have another round of API voting. Maybe not. Hopefully we still can stick to the priorities decision we have taken. Yeah, but there is still some uncertainty. We cannot finalize our idea. So basically what Dan had in mind before is that tenancy is mostly just deny, not same tenant. But based on our user stories, there is a semantics to allow same tenant, which is slightly different. And it also should be implemented slightly differently. And that basically came up when we tried to figure out what new implicit priority for tenancy should be. Yeah, so this whole discussion is in the NPEP. Feel free to go read the comments, share your thoughts on that. But basically what I'm trying to say, I think we agreed that we definitely want to get rid of the tenancy and like same, not same labels as a part of ANP. So this pull request should move forward and then finalize our ANP and BNP API itself. But tenancy is still not quite finalized. But so I'm not sure how it's gonna affect our beta release or anything like that.
I think it's all right. I mean, I don't want to go forward with something that you as the owner don't feel confident. And I think we should remove not same and same label fields in the meantime, because like we obviously don't want to present that API. We've already kind of come to a consensus on that. Does anyone disagree with going ahead and removing not same and same labels at this point, even though tenancy is not done yet? Cool. I saw a couple of thumbs up, so I'm gonna go ahead and take another pass on Surya's PR that does that, and we can go ahead and get that in. I think that's the right way forward. Like tenancy is a tricky one, and thankfully, I don't think a lot of us have customers like screaming for it yet. But it's something we think they'll want, so we might as well take the time to fine tune the user stories. Nadia, so this is kind of a process that we've never encountered before, which is we're taking a step back on an NPEP. Does that mean we're going to be only removing user stories, or are we changing them completely? Like, what do you think is going to be the best way for us to move forward with tenancy?
Yeah, I think the changes should not be that big. Can discuss that. We'll either just add more explanations to the existing user stories, or maybe rephrase them a little bit, but not all of them. So it's actually minor changes. Maybe we can even try to do that within the same PR. Maybe I will open another one. But most of the progress we have done already still applies. It just wasn't, the wording in the user stories was not, I guess, obvious enough. for us to think about the same things while we were discussing the API. So it's basically, I guess, more of a refinement than actually just taking a step back and like redefining everything. So it shouldn't be that bad.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fine with it going into the same PR because we have so much good conversation there. I know it's really long, but I think it would explain. So you could just add a commit there, kind of pointing back to a comment in the PR. I think that'll be the easiest way to do it, so we don't lose all that discussion. I know it's like it's hard. Either you open a new one and it's not as many things to think about, but if you open a new PR, you lose a lot of the context on that. So keep the context, fix it there, and move forward. But in the meantime, we'll remove saying
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just there is one discussion under removing same labels is about renaming some of the fields we have. So also let's just all try to take a look at that one and express our opinions. I haven't done that myself, but I did see the discussion and they had similar thoughts about how we name our fields now when namespace selector has become somewhat simpler. So maybe I can, or sorry, maybe if you have a link for removing the labels, you can add it here in the agenda so that people can just go there and check it.
Yeah, and I can add that after too.
Right, it's right here. Okay, well, so I think that's basically all I wanted to say. We seem to have some kind of a plan. We're going to move forward with that. NPAP hopefully have some discussions during KubeCon. Definitely will catch everything we discuss in the NPAP itself, so everyone can refer to it.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great opportunity to talk about it even more face to face. I'm not going to be there, but I am sure I will hear all about it. So exciting stuff. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to mention, I'll throw it on the agenda again. We need Nadia. I saw you did a really good review of FQDN selector, but we still need more reviews on that. I'm gonna try to take a pass this week. It's on my short list, and then move it forward if nothing looks wrong. So last call, kind of on that. Okay. Anyone else want to talk about anything? If not, we can get some time back and prep for KubeCon.
I have a kind of controversial topic, but I don't know, maybe we can postpone it if you feel pre-KubeCon today and everyone wants to just finish that early.
Up to you. If you want to talk about it, feel free. If not, talk about it.
Yeah, I think I can just I'll throw an idea here. Maybe you can think about that during your free time. And I think Dan also has some context on that.
So I won't be at KubeCon, so I would love to hear it.
Yeah, no, I don't think we're gonna. I meant we can discuss that on the meeting after KubeCon, since we didn't have too many things today. Yeah, we definitely, again, even if something happens there, I'll try to write it down somewhere so people can see what's happening. Basically, so that is a part of the conversation, as I said. Dan seems to have more context about that because that relates to how network policies, the original network policies, were designed. So basically the question here is, and that was a part of a discussion for external networks or CIDRs that we are trying to merge now for egress traffic. And there was a discussion about how basically service IP is an exception to IP matching because network policies are applied after the service IP is resolved. So that made me thinking about why it works like that. And I think there is a very long story behind that. But basically my idea here is that service is not the same as a set of backend pods. That's basically how network policies work for now. If you want to allow a service, you just need to put up the same backend pod selector to a network policy, and then service traffic is allowed. There are I'm not sure if that's actually even intuitive enough, but there are also some disadvantages to that. The most obvious one is that basically you need to duplicate the same information. So in case you ever change your selector in the service, you need to go and update network policies too. then another point to that is that pinging a pod and pinging a service is not really the same. So potentially using pod selector as a service backend may not be that obvious. Then there are some more topics I have put to the agenda, like for example, if a service is provided by another namespace and they can be referred in the cluster by just its DNS name or something like that, you may not even know what backend selector lies behind that. And then like basically all these different disadvantages I've listed. So I was thinking if it actually makes sense to match services differently or separately, so that a pod selector only works when you ping a pod directly, and then you can resolve and you can apply network policies before resolving service IPs to a set of backends. In that case, you can explicitly allow service if that's what you care about. So service IP basically would be matched. And then if you want to allow a set of pods, you use pod selector. Besides just potentially, I don't know, being easier to understand, another potential advantage is that it may fix our difficulties with external networks matching, because in that case, service CIDR is as good as any other CIDR. It can be matched in the same way, and it doesn't need to be an exclusion in any way.
Is this all in this, again, though, just to frame this conversation, kind of spun out of you thinking about what selecting a service VIP with a CIDR selector would mean? Is that literally like what framed this whole idea?
It started from there, right? Because when we say you cannot now match a service by its IP, and it's some kind of exclusion, that made me thinking. So basically that's what started this thinking process. But most of the points here is just, I think we're all used to using a set of backend pods, a selector for backend pods as a way to select service. But if you think about that from scratch, it's not that obvious why it should work like that. And again, Dan said that there was some history about that, and like making egress and ingress symmetrical, and then for ingress services didn't make sense. So something around that, right? Again, I see there is some history about that, and I just tried to put some points here about why I think it may be reasonable to implement that and define it in a different way. And I just like to hear more thoughts on that, I guess.
Is this something we tackle in something like a service selector field? Like, would it all be wrapped up into under a service selector NPEP, or is it a little more?
Well, I mean, yeah, potentially what we could do, right, is like redefine how the pod selector works. So first of all, of course, you'll need to add service selector, and you can select a service by namespace name, by labels, or whatever way you prefer. But the potential difficulty with that is that it changes the current behavior of pod selector, because basically if you split the services and pods, just using the same backend pod selector as service users will not allow service traffic anymore. To allow services, you would need to explicitly select service to allow it. So yeah, that's kind of, what's wrong with
I got you. Mike has his hand up.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for calling this out. This is definitely, I agree, it's awkward. I think it's probably possibly worth taking a look at how Istio has approached this. On a handful of resources, they've added a target ref selector, which is pretty similar to a same named thing that exists in Gateway API, either target ref or parent ref, which is often used to select a service or gateway type resource as basically a union type of, like, you define one of either the traditional selector, workload selector that targets pods, or you define something like a target ref. And then that policy is applied implicitly through whatever pods that service selects. That feels like a pattern that may be worth taking a look at for this use case.
I think I have a question. If it's explicitly specified that using a reference to a service should be implemented as resolving the service to a set of backend pods? Or is it like kind of an implementation detail and in the API, you just see a service reference and that's it?
So in the API, you just see like a reference to a named service. So you'd have like target ref, like group is like the empty string default group, like type service, and then name of the service. I forget like how explicit it is in terms of how it's applied, like if that's just in the code or if it's like in tests. But yeah, I think that there's flexibility there to define how explicitly we would want that. Like for this spec, we could have like conformance tests or something like that to encode that behavior, I would think.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think it just should align with our egress and CIDR's egress networks design, right? So that potentially service IP should not be probably an exception to our IP matching. So I mean, potentially if I select service IP, it probably could work to allow egress or like deny even. I mean, again, it's not recommended same as with pod IPs, but probably it should be somewhat consistent in behavior. So yeah, but that's a good point. We definitely can try to take a look at that one.
Surya?
Just anecdotally, the cloud providers really care about service IP matching, much more than they care about pod IP matching. Just to add support to what you're saying.
Surya?
Yeah, I just wanted to take a step back and think about the first block, which is service is not equal to backend pods, right? What does that mean in reality? What's serving at the service WIP? What is that entity when I say I want to block a service?
Well, service by itself, I mean, has more fields
nothing.
than just backend pods, right? I mean,
But it's
when
nothing,
you
right? Like it's a vacuum.
no,
And the
I
real
think
thing
for
serving the traffic is pod, right? In terms of networking.
well, I think yeah, we can first of all we can agree service is not backend pods. It's just at least some extra policies, as you know, that service has, right? About how the traffic is load balanced and everything. But that's even not about that, but about how clients think about it. For a client, a pod especially, right, that wants to use a service in a Kubernetes cluster, I want to use a service, not a set of backend pods that it's resolved to from the networking perspective. I may not even know what a service is resolved to. I just know its cluster internal DNS name or something like that.
But today it's all resolved to pods in Kubernetes. Do we have another entity that service resolves to? Like, I know there's a lot of new work coming up, and I definitely agree that we should definitely, sorry, did I cut over someone?
I was just saying Kube API server is an example.
Right, host network pods or pods, you mean? Or you mean like Kube API server as an external entity?
Sure.
Which is not a pod?
Yeah.
Yeah, but like what I'm trying to say is what serves at the service ultimately, right? Like if we can't define what we are trying to block, how do you, like I get this perspective,
service.
I'm just also bringing the other perspective, right? It's not that I'm not,
So
I'm just trying to see the other side of the coin.
So you could deny or allow on the host before the traffic even has a chance to exit an enforceable entity, right? And you don't know where it's going or where it's coming from. You just know that it matches to this service, and then you can enforce a rule.
It also could have benefits of like allowing some matches for host network pods because service may be resolved to them and you could still match on service IP, but service is a very simple entity networking wise and it has its own meaning, right? It has its own IP and everything.
And does it boil, Surya and Nadia, does it boil down to like, I know we're all thinking of it from an implementation point of view, which is why I think it's confusing. I think it's trying to answer the question, does this, deny traffic to a service VIP resolve to 3 rules that deny traffic to the pods behind the service VIP, or a rule denying traffic to the service VIP, right? Is that kind of where we're thinking
Yeah,
differently?
it's more,
Yeah.
I'm more thinking about allow, I guess, because denying the service doesn't make a lot of sense. You can create another service with the same set of backend pods. But yeah, it's just that service AP and the set of pods, they actually are different potentially. So you want to allow a service AP, and then actually if you only allow a service and your pod pings a backend pod of that service, it should not be allowed, because you only allowed pinging a service and not some random pod. Right? So then again, if a definition of service, let's say, changes and now it selects a different set of pods, and not completely different pods are allowed now. So I don't want to allow pinging a pod. If you want to ping a pod, use pod selector. If you want to ping service, use service, right?
That was always the pushback for service selector in V1. Like folks were always like, it's impossible to implement. Like, how do you update rules when the set of pods for a service is constantly changing? But if you change your stance and examine it as, a VIP as its own entity, it makes sense to me.
This is how Cilium works, actually. Cilium doesn't consider a service a set of pods. It considers it a specific IP that maps to an entity or an identity within Cilium. Actually, we have implemented internal CIDR rules on Cilium, but they only work for services right now. So we haven't enabled it for pods, but there was a lot of demand to implement service IP selection policy.
That's interesting. Does Cilium, so why were folks asking for that? Wouldn't they rather have a label selector semantic than a internal CIDR semantic for selecting services?
It was a very explicit demand from EKS that they wanted to allow network policy for services because the control plane isn't in the cluster. From a network. That makes a lot. Yeah. That makes a lot more sense. It's still an internal address, right? It's kind of a confusing concept, right? You don't want to go too far down in implementation thinking because it's not good API design. Right. That's the whole thing I'm trying to avoid.
Right. Nathan, that's actually an interesting use case. If you backtrack what you said, if the entity lives outside the cluster, which indirectly means that entity can be anything. Like, it's not an endpoint or a pod or anything known by Kubernetes. The only way Kubernetes knows that thing or knows how to route to it is through a service API.
Exactly. And that's actually a very common use case in lots of different networking scenarios.
Yeah, and I agree fully. I think, Kubernetes as a community and a lot of our networking APIs has not thought like that. And when they design their APIs, like all the entries APIs for the most part, excluding now the gateway API, like we're very focused on the Kubernetes world and what that's it, right? Like not thinking about outside the cluster. Maybe that changes now. I think Gateway API has done a better job, and clearly, customers and users want it. So it's a lot to think about. I think really this discussion continues in the CIDR group and PEP, and also in a future service selector feature. Those two, I think, within them we can answer them, but it's really something interesting to think about.
Right. We also, I think we're used to saying that network policy matching happens after service is resolved. But then if you just try to figure out why, I'm not sure if there is an answer.
Well, that's an implementation point of view.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's just a thought here. Yeah, we don't need to decide anything right now, but yeah, just maybe getting feedback. Maybe I can open some issue based on that to capture more comments if people will have them.
Yeah, the previous discussion which we had, right? Like the whole thing that stemmed from the external CIDR PR, I opened a new PR based on the review comments on that PR, which is what is tracked in 204, right? But we seem to be going in a different direction compared to what we discussed the last time. So I definitely think we should open an issue to capture all that. And second thing, I think it's also important to note how we are documenting HDA network policies. At least still we do DNP. I'm a little bit too worried on how ANP would work with NP if ANP is defining services interaction in one way and NP is doing it in another way with regards to paths, just as long as they coexist. But that's really a long for in the future, right? But
Yeah,
it's just
I agree. It's confusing, but the end of the day for us involves developer network policy, not network policy, right? At some point.
yeah, definitely.
Because like, I don't know, we're still moving pretty slow. We're moving faster than this community ever has in terms of network security APIs. But like, my perfect view of the world is that we aren't held back by, you know, old design decisions, and we are pushed forward by actual things that people want. Just like Nathan telling us, like, this use case that from a networking point of view makes complete sense. From a Kubernetes point of view, may not. So it's good to think about. Well, Nadia, you did a really good job. That was my brain's doing
Sorry. I warned you, it's controversial.
I hope you talk about it more at KubeCon, and I hope if you bring one thing from this meeting, it's when you talk to Dan or anyone else, try to separate the implementer's brain from the API brain. Like, let's leave the implementers out. I don't want to hear Dan come back and say like, oh, we can't do service selector because we can't implement it. Like, if we do the API and no one can implement it, they're going to tell us and we'll remove it. But I don't think it's unimplementable.
I don't think it's controversial, and I think a lot of people who use Kubernetes clusters don't use them in isolation. And one of the easiest ways to have an internal IP mapped to an external endpoint is service. And so the idea that it should be regulated on its own, I think, is it's an important idea that I think a lot of users expect.
Yeah, I think I agree with Nathan, especially because he brought up that real use case, which end users of Kubernetes are using, right? Like, but I also have the back of my mind telling me that differentiation between services and a service not being equal to a pod, like from a networking perspective, what serves at a service. If there's nothing backing it, then it's just an IP. And then it doesn't make sense when I think raw that way, but I still need to convince myself of that, right? But having said that, like, if we have a valid use case, I definitely think we should at least warrant a discussion around this. Like, yeah.
Sweet. Any other comments, questions here? We have a lot of that in the agenda from this conversation. Nadia, do you think when y'all are at KubeCon, you could sit down and maybe make an issue summarizing that?
Yeah, I'll make an issue right now. I have the beginning of it, I guess, at least. And then we've had lots of nice comments. I didn't have a chance to capture them right now in writing. So I'll just add a link to the issue to the agenda. And then everyone who has any thoughts, I think Mike and Nathan have some really nice comments and extra use cases. Just please update the issue with them.
Yeah, that'd be great if y'all could do that. Thank you. Okay, anything else for today, folks? Open floor, going once, going twice. Sold. We'll get some time back. Thanks, Nadia, for bringing that up. That was awesome. I hope everyone has a really good time at KubeCon next week. Stay tuned. If you're there, please go watch our session. If you're not, you can watch it online. Yeah, and if someone could just make sure they keep a set of notes on what goes on next week, that would be awesome. We'll talk about it when we get back. Thanks so much, everybody. Talk to you later.